My sister was wearing my wedding dress when she asked me to pay for her wedding. Not a dress like mine. My dress. The one I had packed away in a garment bag at the back of a closet, because I could not bear to look at it after my marriage ended. It had been altered at the waist. The sleeves had been changed, but the beadwork along the neckline was unmistakable. I had chosen every small detail with my mother on a cold Saturday in November. I knew that dress better than I knew the face of the woman standing in front of me. Beside her stood my husband, or, more accurately, the man I had been married to for 11 years before he told me he needed space, then told everyone else he needed a new life. His hand rested at the small of my sister's back as though it had always belonged there. The room was set for a rehearsal dinner. Candles, white roses, place cards in cream envelopes. Everyone was speaking softly because that is what people do when they know something is wrong but have agreed to pretend it is not. My sister Elise walked toward me with a smile that looked rehearsed. She held out a velvet envelope and said, "There is one small thing. The venue balance is due Friday, and you have always handled the payments." For a second I thought I had heard her incorrectly. Then I opened the envelope. It was an invoice for the ballroom, the flowers, the catering, and the late-night bar. The total was larger than the balance on the first car I ever bought. At the bottom, in a section marked account holder, was my name. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw the envelope. I took out my phone, opened my banking app, and read every transfer I had made in the previous 6 months. The deposits, the reservation fee, the payment for the flowers that Elise said she would reimburse once she received a bonus. The balance was not a favor they were asking from me. It was proof. And that is when I understood why my sister had invited me to the rehearsal dinner. She did not want my blessing. She wanted my silence, my money, and the old version of me who would keep a room comfortable even while it was breaking her apart. I closed the invoice and looked across the table at the venue manager. Her name was Mara. We had met twice before when I still believed I was helping my sister plan a difficult season of her life. She recognized me immediately. "Mara," I said, "before anyone pays another $1, I need to know exactly who has authority over this account." The room went still. My husband looked at Elise. Elise looked at me. And for the first time in my life, I let the silence belong to them. Mara did not begin with an apology. She began with an envelope. It was cream-colored, thick enough to feel expensive, with both of their names written across the front in gold ink. Mara and Daniel. I knew Daniel's handwriting. He still made the letter D too large, the way he had when we first moved in together. I stood in my own kitchen and recognized it before I had even opened the flap. Mara smiled as if she had brought me an invitation to a baby shower. She had changed into a pale blue dress after the ceremony. Her hair was pinned up, and a tiny piece of white tulle was still caught near one ear. "The venue needs the final balance by Friday," she said. "We thought it would be easier if you handled it. You always know how these things work." For a few seconds I did not understand the sentence. Then I understood every part of it at once. Daniel stood behind her, close enough to touch her shoulder, far enough away to pretend he had no part in the request. He looked at the floor. That was the detail I remember most. Not the dress. Not the envelope. His shoes on my kitchen tile. I asked Mara where she had found the figure written on the invoice. She blinked. "You sent it to Daniel last month. When you were sorting the old account." That was true. I had sent Daniel a spreadsheet when we were still trying to sell the apartment we had rented together. It listed the deposits I had paid from my savings, the vendor refunds, the insurance credit, and the account numbers connected to our wedding cancellation. I had sent it because I believed we were dividing our life fairly. Mara believed it was a payment plan. I did not raise my voice. I did not tell them what kind of people they were. I looked at the invoice, then at the date, then at the account reference. I asked if they had used my name when they booked the ballroom. Daniel finally looked up. "We used your old vendor contact," he said. "It was only to get the rate." Only. A small word people use when they want you to carry the weight of something large. I handed the envelope back to Mara. I told her I would review what was mine and what was theirs. She gave a thin laugh as though I had made a joke. "Elise, this is family," she said. I looked at her and realized that she meant the opposite. Family, in that moment, meant I was expected to make a loss feel convenient. After they left, I put the envelope beside the kettle. I did not open wine. I did not call my mother. I opened my laptop and started a folder with the date as its name. That was the first thing I did for myself that night. I gave the folder a dull name, Account Review. I did that on purpose. If I had called it Betrayal or Wedding, I would have had to see the wound every time I opened my computer. I needed a place for the facts, not another place for panic. Inside it, I saved the invoice, a copy of the invitation, and a screenshot of Mara's message. I wrote down the time she had arrived at my apartment, the words she had used, and Daniel's answer about the vendor contact. I was not building a case against my family. I was recording the moment before memory became unreliable. I knew what grief could do. It could make you replay a conversation until the other person sounded kinder than they were. It could make you blame yourself for not noticing a detail soon enough. A written record did not make the situation less sad. It gave me something steady to return to when my mind started negotiating against me. Near midnight, I found an old photo from the year Mara and I were teenagers. We were on a beach, both sunburned, both laughing at something outside the frame. I almost deleted it. Then I closed the photo without deciding. Not every object needed a verdict that night. What I needed was sleep. I placed the envelope in the folder, shut the laptop and put the kettle on again. The ordinary sound of water beginning to boil was the only thing in the room that did not ask anything of me. The next morning, I made coffee and read every document from the beginning. There was no dramatic discovery. There was no secret contract that turned grief into a clean victory. There were bank statements, emails, booking confirmations, and a string of practical messages from people who believed they were helping a bride plan a wedding. I made 3 columns: paid by me, paid by Daniel, and not yet paid. The first column was longer than I expected. When Daniel and I had planned our wedding, I had been the organized one. I made the deposits because my salary arrived earlier in the month. I opened the shared spreadsheet. I answered the florist, the photographer, the caterer, and the venue manager. Daniel had promised to reimburse part of it after his quarterly bonus. Then the wedding stopped being ours before any of those details were finished. At the time, I had told myself the losses were simply the price of leaving a marriage that had become dishonest. I did not want to chase a person who had already made his choice. I wanted distance. I wanted silence. I wanted to stop calculating what I had lost. Mara and Daniel had mistaken that silence for permission. The venue contract was in my email. The card on file was mine. The account holder for the payment portal was me. Daniel had asked the venue to keep the original booking terms while changing the event names. He had not told me he was doing it. The manager had made the change because she assumed he was authorized. That did not make the manager cruel. It made the process careless. I called the venue and asked for copies of every change request. I did not accuse anyone. I said I was reviewing an account in my name and needed the record for my files. The manager, a woman named Priya, sounded embarrassed when she found the emails. She said Daniel had written from his personal address and referenced information from the original agreement. She said he had never explicitly said I had approved the transfer. I should have checked, she told me. Please send the documents, I said. By lunchtime I had them all. The message that mattered most was only 2 sentences. Daniel had written that I was aware of the change, and that the remaining balance would be paid from the original account. It was not a forged signature. It was not a legal confession. It was simply untrue. I printed it anyway. Then I called my bank. I asked what steps were available to prevent future charges on an account only I controlled. The representative explained the options in plain language. I chose the narrowest one. I removed the saved payment method, changed the password, and asked for alerts on any attempted transaction. The work took 40 minutes. The relief took longer. By evening, my mother had called 3 times. I let the first 2 calls go to voicemail. On the third, I answered because I knew she would not stop. My mother has always treated unanswered calls as a problem to solve, not a boundary to respect. She did not ask how I was. She asked why Mara was crying. She says you embarrassed her, my mother said. I stood by the window and watched rain move across the streetlights. I told her I would not pay for her wedding. There was a pause that lasted just long enough for her to decide which version of fairness she preferred. You know this has been difficult for everyone, she said. Everyone. Another word that can hide a decision. I told her the venue account and payment method were mine. I told her Daniel had represented that I agreed to the transfer. I told her I had changed access and requested records. My mother sighed. But are you really going to make this worse? That question was familiar. It had followed Mara and me since we were children. When Mara borrowed my clothes and ruined them, I was asked not to make it worse. When she used my graduation money for a weekend trip and promised to replace it, I was asked not to make it worse. When Daniel stopped coming to family dinners because he said he was too busy, I was asked not to make it worse. I had spent years confusing peace with surrender. I am not making it worse, I said. I am stopping something that should not have happened. My mother said Mara was scared the guests would find out. I said that was not in my control. The venue was between Mara, Daniel, and the venue. My finances were between me and my bank. She began to say that blood should count for something. It does, I said. That is why this hurts. The call ended without a resolution. I expected to feel guilty. Instead, I felt tired in a new, clean way. The sort of tiredness that comes after carrying a box up too many flights of stairs and finally putting it down. Later, Mara sent a message. You are punishing me because you cannot forgive Daniel. I read it twice. Then I wrote one answer. This is about money and accounts in my name. Please communicate by email. I did not explain the affair. I did not describe the marriage. I did not try to prove that I had been wounded first. I knew what would happen if I made the story about pain. Everyone would argue about whether I had enough of it to deserve a boundary. Documents were quieter. Documents did not beg to be believed. The next day, my mother sent a photo of Mara as a child, dressed in a costume for a school play. There was no message beneath it. I understood the intention anyway. She wanted me to remember that Mara had once been small, frightened, and easy to forgive. I remembered. That was never the problem. I remembered sharing a bedroom with Mara until I was 16. I remembered tying her shoes when she was late for school. I remembered taking the blame when she broke our father's watch because she had looked at me with terrified eyes. Loving someone for a long time can make their present actions difficult to name. But a history of care does not erase a current choice. Can explain why the choice hurts. Cannot make it acceptable. I wrote my mother a message and did not send it. I wrote that I could hold both truths. Mara was my sister and Mara had harmed me. I could feel compassion for the fear that made her avoid responsibility and still refused to pay a cost she had placed in my hands. I deleted the draft. I did not need to persuade my mother in one perfect message. I needed to keep acting in a way I could explain to myself later. That evening, I updated the folder with the phone call. Date, time, summary. The list was becoming longer, but it was also making the shape of the situation clearer. No single moment had trapped me. There had been a series of small assumptions, each one leaning on the next, until everyone expected me to absorb the final bill. The guest list arrived in my inbox by accident. Mara had forwarded a seating chart to the venue coordinator, and Priya included me on the reply because my email was still attached to the event file. I could have deleted it. Instead, I opened it once. My name was on the list. Not as the bride's sister. Not as Daniel's former wife. Under the section titled Payments and Vendor Contact, with my phone number beside it. I stared at the screen until the words stopped looking like language. There were names of cousins who had not called me in months. There were Daniel's co-workers, the same people who had watched him give a toast at our engagement party. There were neighbors from the building we used to live in. There was even a place card from my aunt, who had told me at Christmas that some women create their own heartbreak by being too busy to notice their husbands. Mara had planned a room full of people who would not know the invoice had been pointed toward me. I thought about forwarding the list to everyone. I thought about writing a message so precise that nobody could misunderstand. I even drafted one. It was 4 paragraphs long, and every sentence carried the sharpness I had refused to use aloud. Then I deleted it. Public humiliation would have felt satisfying for one evening. It would also have made me part of the spectacle Mara had built. I did not want a room full of people deciding whether my reaction was tasteful enough. I wanted my name removed from obligations I had never accepted. I wrote Priya instead. I asked her to delete my phone number from the event contact sheet and remove my email from future correspondence. I attached the bank confirmation showing that my payment method had been removed. I asked that any remaining balance be directed to the people who had signed the current agreement. Priya replied within an hour. She apologized again. She confirmed the event file would be updated and said the couple would need to complete a new authorization form before further changes could be processed. That was all. No fireworks. No confrontation in the lobby. No one applauded. But something important changed. The wedding stopped resting on my invisible labor. At dinner, I ate toast and soup because I had no appetite for anything else. I watched my inbox. Just after 9, Daniel wrote, "You did not have to involve the venue." I read the sentence and almost laughed. He had involved the venue. Mara had involved the venue. I had asked it to stop involving me. I responded with the same sentence I had used before. "Please communicate by email about any financial matter in my name." Then I turned off my phone and slept for 6 hours without waking once. Daniel came to my apartment 2 days later. He did not knock hard. He used the soft, patient knock he used when he wanted to be seen as reasonable. I watched him through the peephole for a full minute before I opened the door with the chain still on. He looked thinner than I remembered. That surprised me, and I hated that it did. A part of me had expected betrayal to leave the other person untouched, polished, and certain. Instead, he looked like someone who had discovered that consequences have administrative forms. "Can we talk?" he asked. "You can email," I said. "Elise, please. This is getting out of control." I kept my hand on the door. "Which part?" He looked past me, as though my apartment might still contain a place for him. Mara did not understand the account situation. I did not explain it well. There it was. Not an apology. A change in lighting. I asked him whether he had told the venue I agreed to use my account. He said he had assumed I would not mind because the deposits had already been made. He said he thought the wedding could be a way for all of us to move forward. He said Mara had been under stress. I listened until he stopped. "You used my name without asking," I said. "You asked my sister to expect money from me. Those are the facts." He rubbed his forehead. "You are making me sound like a criminal." "I am not calling you anything," I said. "I am describing what happened." For the first time his face changed. The old Daniel would have been angry. This Daniel looked frightened, but not because he understood what he had done. He was frightened because the story was no longer under his control. He told me he could repay the deposits eventually. He said the wedding was already planned. He said cancellations would hurt Mara. He said people would talk. I told him I was not seeking to punish either of them. I was not taking action beyond protecting my accounts and requesting accurate records. If he wanted to discuss repayment, he could put a proposal in writing. "You would really do this to your own sister?" he asked. I looked at him for a long time. "She is my sister," I said. That is why she knew exactly what she was asking. He left without shouting. I closed the door and locked it. Then I sat on the floor in my hallway and cried. Not because I doubted myself. Because I had stopped doubting myself, and that made the whole loss real. The wedding did not disappear. It changed shape. Mara and Daniel moved it from the ballroom to a restaurant with a private room. I learned this from my cousin Lena, who called only after she had checked that I wanted to talk. That alone made me trust her. "They are telling people it was always the plan," she said carefully. "That is their choice," I told her. Lena asked whether I wanted her to correct anyone. I said no. I did not want messengers. I did not want allies recruited into a family war. I wanted a boundary that could stand without an audience. The new venue was less expensive, and the guest list was shorter. I knew this because Mara accidentally copied me on another email before Priya removed my address completely. This time I did not read every name. I closed it after the first page. There was a freedom in no longer needing every detail. Daniel sent a repayment proposal that same week. It was not generous. It was not insulting either. He acknowledged a specific amount from the original deposits and offered monthly payments over a year. He did not mention the emotional cost, the deception, or Mara. He kept it narrow. So did I. I asked for a clearer schedule and confirmation that no future vendors would contact me. He agreed. We put the terms in emails and kept the amounts tied to records we both had. Some people would have wanted more. I understood that. There were days I wanted more too. A confession, an explanation that made the years feel less foolish, an admission from Mara that she had crossed a line no sister should cross. But I had learned that wanting something does not make it available. The money mattered because it represented a real loss. The accounts mattered because they were mine. The rest was a grief no invoice could resolve. I began walking after work. At first, I walked the same 4 blocks because I did not have the energy to choose a longer route. Then I started taking the path through the small park behind the library. The trees were bare, and the benches were wet most days, but the route gave my body somewhere to put the anger. One afternoon, I passed a woman teaching her daughter how to ride a bicycle. The child kept looking back, asking if her mother was still there. Each time her mother said yes. I thought about how much of my life had been spent looking back at people who were no longer holding on. That evening, I removed Daniel from the shared photo storage. Took 7 clicks. I had delayed it for months because I imagined it would feel like destroying evidence. It did not. The evidence was already stored where it needed to be. Lena came over the following Sunday with groceries and no advice. She put a bag of oranges on the counter, asked where I kept the knives, and began chopping vegetables as if this were a normal visit. I nearly cried before she had taken off her coat. "You do not have to tell me anything," she said. "But you do not have to sit alone either." We made pasta and talked about work for an hour. Then, because the conversation had been ordinary first, I told her what Daniel had said at my door. I told her about the invoice and the account. I expected her to ask what I planned to do next. Instead, she asked whether I had eaten that day. Sounds small, but that question brought me back into my body. I had spent so much time arranging evidence that I had forgotten I was allowed to need care too. After dinner, Lena asked if I wanted her to take copies of the documents in case my laptop failed. We saved an encrypted backup together. It was practical. It was calm. It made me feel less alone without making the story larger. When she left, she hugged me at the door and said, "You are not cruel for being clear." I repeated that sentence to myself for several weeks. Their wedding was on a Saturday in October. I knew the date without checking. My body had remembered it before my mind could pretend it was ordinary. For weeks I debated whether I should leave the city. Lena offered her guest room. A colleague offered to trade weekend shifts so I could take a short trip. My mother sent one message asking if I was really refusing to come. I did not answer her. In the end, I stayed home. That choice felt less dramatic than running away. I did not need a new landscape to prove I was moving forward. I needed to learn that my own apartment could belong to me even on the day they chose for their beginning. I bought groceries on Friday night. I cleaned the bathroom. I changed the sheets. I made a list of things I had been postponing because every task had seemed meaningless beside the larger disaster. On Saturday morning, I went to the market early and bought flowers with no occasion attached to them. I chose dark red dahlias and pale branches that looked almost silver. The florist wrapped them in brown paper. At noon, I turned off my phone. I cooked a meal that took too long. I listened to music I had not shared with Daniel. I watched a documentary halfway through and stopped because I was not paying attention. Then I sat by the window with tea and let the day pass without trying to make it noble. There were hard moments. Around 3, I imagined Mara putting on her dress. Around 5, I imagined Daniel waiting at the front of a room. Around 7, I imagined the photos that would appear online. Each thought arrived like an old habit. Each thought left when I did not feed it. I did not wish them harm. That surprised me most. I wished them the consequences of their own choices, which is different from wishing them pain. I wished them a life in which they had to carry the knowledge of how they began. I wished myself a life that no longer depended on whether they felt sorry. At 9, I turned my phone back on. There were messages from people who had attended. Most were cautious. One cousin wrote, "Thinking of you." Another wrote, "I understand more than I did before." I did not ask what anyone had said. I did not need a report from the room. I replied to Lena with a simple thank you. Then I went to bed. The story reached me anyway. It arrived in pieces as family stories usually do. A phrase from my aunt. A worried message from my mother. A note from someone who had heard that I had tried to ruin the wedding because I could not let go of Daniel. For a day I considered correcting every version. I could have sent the emails. I could have shared the account records. I could have shown the venue request that said I had approved an arrangement I had never seen. The proof existed. It was organized, dated, and easy to understand. But proof is not always medicine. Sometimes it becomes another way of keeping an injury alive. I chose 3 people to tell the full truth. Lena, my mother, and my aunt. I called each of them separately. I did not send screenshots. I described the documents and offered them only if they needed to see them. Lena said she believed me before I finished. My aunt was quiet for a long time. Then she apologized for the comment she had made at Christmas. She said she had repeated what she heard because it fit an easy story. I told her I appreciated the apology. I meant it, though it did not restore anything. My mother was the hardest. She kept returning to Mara's feelings. She said Mara had made mistakes but deserved support. I said I did not disagree. Support did not require access to my money, my accounts, or my silence. I do not know how to be a mother to both of you now, she said. I heard the sadness in her voice. I also heard the request beneath it. Make this easier for me. You do not have to choose between us, I said. You do have to stop asking me to carry what Mara did. She cried then. I nearly took the sentence back. That was my old instinct. I had always rushed to soften the truth when someone else was uncomfortable. Instead, I stayed quiet. Silence gave her room to think. It gave me room not to rescue her from it. After that call, the messages slowed. The family did not become healthy overnight. There was no meeting where everyone admitted exactly what had happened. Some relatives continued to keep distance. Some chose Mara's version because it was simpler. I stopped trying to be understandable to people invested in misunderstanding me. That decision did not make me cold. It made me available for the relationships that could hold the truth. There was a consequence to that decision I had not expected. Once I stopped explaining myself to everyone, I had more attention for the people in front of me. At work, I noticed Farah struggling with a deadline and offered to take one small task. She accepted without acting as though I had saved her life. We ate lunch together afterward and talked about a book she was reading. That kind of exchange felt almost unfamiliar. Help offered, help accepted, no debt quietly created. I began to recognize how often I had confused being useful with being loved. In my marriage, I had managed calendars and bills because I thought competence was a form of security. In my family, I had mediated arguments because I thought harmony depended on my patience. Neither habit was entirely bad. Both became dangerous when other people treated them as an unlimited resource. I did not decide to become suspicious of everyone. I decided to ask better questions. Who had agreed to this? Whose name was on the form? What happens if I say no? These questions sounded administrative, but they changed the emotional landscape of my life. They gave me time before commitment. They gave other people a chance to be direct. By winter, the family story had become less interesting to most people. That was another lesson. The thing that felt enormous inside me was only one conversation among many to everyone else. I could let it shrink without pretending it had never mattered. Daniel made the first payment in November. The amount was exactly what we had agreed upon. The transfer arrived without a message, and I stared at the bank notification for several minutes. It was strange how ordinary it looked. A number, a date, a sender's name. For so long, I had imagined that justice would announce itself. I thought it would come with a confrontation, a speech, or a moment when everyone saw the situation clearly. Instead, it came in small monthly transfers. The payments did not heal the marriage. They did not repair my relationship with Mara. They did not return the version of my family I thought I had. But each transfer confirmed a fact I had been afraid to hold. I had been right to protect what was mine. Mara did not contact me for months. When she finally did, it was near my birthday. Her message was short. She said she hoped I was well. She said she was sorry for how things happened. She said she had been afraid and had convinced herself that I would eventually understand. I read it at my desk after work. I wanted to ask why fear had made her feel entitled to take from me. I wanted to ask when she had first started seeing Daniel differently. I wanted to know whether she had ever looked at me and felt guilt. Those questions were real. They were also doors that would lead back into a house I was trying to leave. I wrote, I appreciate you acknowledging that it was wrong. I need more time and distance. Please continue to keep financial matters through email. It was not a warm reply. It was honest. The final payment arrived the following autumn. I had almost forgotten the exact date because my life had become full of other dates. A new role at work, Lena's engagement, the weekend I took a train to the coast alone, the day I signed a lease for a smaller apartment with windows that faced trees. When the last transfer appeared, I did not feel triumphant. I felt finished. I archived the folder on my laptop. I did not delete it. Keeping records had helped me when I needed them. But I moved the folder out of sight because evidence is meant to serve a purpose, not become a monument. Then I bought myself dinner from the little restaurant around the corner. I ate at the bar with a book open beside me. Nobody knew what the day meant. That anonymity felt like a gift. People often ask what remains after betrayal. They expect an answer about caution. They expect me to say I became harder to fool, harder to love, harder to reach. Some of that is true. I read documents more carefully now. I do not confuse urgency with responsibility. When someone says, "You always handle this," I ask whether I agreed to handle it. But that is not the whole answer. I kept my ability to care. I kept my sense of humor, though it returned slowly. I kept the part of me that notices when someone is overwhelmed and offers help without making them feel small. The difference is that I no longer offer myself as the solution to every problem. Mara and I have spoken twice since her message. The conversations were brief. Once she asked about our mother. Once she sent a photo of a recipe we both used to make with our grandmother. I responded politely. I did not pretend the old closeness had returned. Forgiveness, if it comes, will have to be built from actions over time. I do not owe it as proof that I am a good person. Daniel and I no longer speak. The repayment agreement ended. There was nothing else to negotiate. I wish him a life where he learns to be honest before he needs a spreadsheet to explain why he was not. My mother visits sometimes. She does not bring Mara's news unless I ask. That is a change. It is not perfect, but it is real. We talk about ordinary things. Recipes, her garden, the movie she watched last week. At first, the ordinary conversation felt like avoidance. Now I see it can also be a way to meet again without pretending. I have learned to notice the people who make room for my no. Lena does. My colleague Farah does. The neighbor downstairs does. Even when she only asks if I can accept a delivery and waits for my answer. Small respect is still respect. There are nights when I remember the envelope on my kitchen counter. I remember Mara saying, "You always handle the payments." The sentence no longer cuts in the same place. Now it reminds me of the moment I stopped being assigned a role in someone else's story. I did not become fearless. I became specific. That has been enough. Sometimes I think about the version of myself who stood in the kitchen holding Mara's envelope. I want to go back and tell her that she will not find the perfect response. She will not make everyone see clearly. She will lose relationships she hoped were stronger than they were. I would also tell her that she will make new routines. She will learn which grocery store stays open late. She will buy a lamp for the corner by the window. She will laugh so hard at something Lena says that she has to put down her drink. She will have entire weeks when Daniel and Mara are not the first thought in the morning. The future did not arrive as forgiveness or revenge. It arrived as ordinary evidence that I was still living. One night, I found the wedding shoes I had planned to wear for my own ceremony. They were still in their box at the back of a closet. I opened the lid, looked at them, and laughed at how impractical they were. Then I donated them to a local formalwear drive. I did not make a ritual of it. I did not photograph the box. I simply carried it downstairs and put it in my car. That was enough too. A year after their wedding, I opened the old folder one final time. I had no practical reason to do it. The money had been repaid. The payment method had been removed. The venue had confirmed that my name was no longer tied to any event. The messages had stopped. Still, I wanted to see the beginning with the distance of time. I read the invoice. I read Daniel's email to the venue. I read my first message to Mara. Please communicate by email about any financial matter in my name. It was a plain sentence. It had no cleverness in it. No one would frame it or quote it in a speech. But that sentence changed my life. It gave me a line I could return to when conversations tried to drift into blame, guilt, or old family rules. It reminded me that I did not have to defend every feeling in order to protect a fact. I closed the folder and deleted the shortcut from my desktop. Then I opened a new budget spreadsheet for a trip I had been considering. Not a dramatic escape. Just 10 days somewhere I had wanted to see for years. I listed train tickets, a small hotel, museum entry, meals, and room for mistakes. This time, every line was there because I chose it. Before I left, Mara sent another email. She said she understood why I needed distance. She said she did not expect a reply. I did not reply that day. I may not reply for a long time. Healing does not become owed simply because someone finally understands the boundary. At the station, I carried one suitcase and a book. The platform was crowded, the weather was gray, and nothing about the morning looked cinematic. That was exactly what I liked about it. My life had become quiet again. Not empty. Quiet. There is a difference. I used to think strength meant forcing people to admit what they had done. Now I think strength can be much less visible. Can be changing a password, saving a receipt, asking for an email, refusing to pay a bill that is not yours. It can be leaving a room without making anyone understand why. Mara took my husband. Daniel chose to leave our marriage. Neither of those facts disappeared because I protected myself afterward. But neither fact gets to define the whole of my life. The account was in my name. So finally was the future. After the kettle clicked off, I stood in the kitchen with 2 mugs on the counter. One was mine. The other was the one Daniel had always used, even after he moved out. I had not noticed I still kept it within reach. I put it in the back of the cupboard not as a statement, but because I wanted the next morning to ask less of me. At 12:17, Mara sent a message asking whether I had looked at the invoice. I did not answer. 5 minutes later, Daniel wrote, "Please do not make this difficult." I copied both messages into the folder. The words did not need interpretation. They showed that neither of them had arrived confused about the request. The invoice showed a balance I could have paid. That detail mattered. If the amount had been impossible, their request would have been absurd on its face. They were relying on something more complicated. My ability to pay, my habit of solving problems, and my fear of looking harsh when I said no. I remembered the first time Mara had called after she and Daniel told the family they were together. She had said, "I know this is awful, but please do not make me choose between love and everyone else." At the time, I had been too numb to answer. Now I saw the sentence differently. She had asked me to carry the discomfort of a choice she had already made. I did not have language for that then. I had it now. A request for compassion is not permission to transfer a consequence. The distinction sounded cold only because I had been taught that love meant making other people's choices easier to live with. Before bed, I called the building concierge and asked that no one be admitted to my floor without my permission. It felt excessive when I said it out loud. Then I remembered Daniel at my door in my imagination, asking to be reasonable. I added the instruction anyway. I slept badly, but I slept. In the middle of the night, I woke convinced I had forgotten some promise I had made. I checked my email from bed. There was no promise. There was only an old spreadsheet, a venue contract, and a trail of people assuming that my silence could be converted into consent. Priya's email attachments arrived as a compressed folder. I downloaded it twice and saved one copy to an external drive. Then I opened every file slowly. I did not rush because rushing was how I had made myself feel trapped in the first place. The original contract was clear. It listed Daniel and me as the planned couple, but it named me as the primary contact and cardholder. A separate page listed the cancellation terms. Another listed the remaining credit after our wedding had ended. The paperwork was not dramatic. Its plainness was what made Daniel's later message so unsettling. I made a timeline on a yellow legal pad. Original booking. Cancellation. Credit applied. Daniel's request to preserve the rate. Mara's revised event date. The invoice delivered to my apartment. Once the dates sat in one line, the story stopped feeling like a storm and began to look like a sequence of decisions. At 11, my bank called back. The representative, Noah, asked whether anyone else had access to my online banking. I said no. He explained that removing a saved card did not change an existing contract, but it prevented a simple automatic charge. He suggested I speak to the venue directly about authorization. I thanked him and wrote down his name. I asked whether I should dispute anything immediately. He did not tell me what to do. He explained which transactions could be reviewed and which records the bank would need. I appreciated that. I did not want a stranger to give me a heroic plan. I wanted accurate options. The next document was an email from Mara to a florist. She wrote, "Elise has already handled the account side, so we are just finalizing colors." I read it 3 times. It was not a demand for money. It was worse in a quieter way. It showed how easily my name had become part of the background of their new life. I did not contact the florist. I did not need to. The venue was the only contract tied directly to me. That became my rule for the day. Address the account I controlled, not every painful thing I could discover. Around lunch I stepped outside for air. The coffee shop near my office was full of people planning ordinary Saturdays. A man at the counter argued kindly with his partner about whether to order lemon cake. I watched them and felt briefly angry at their ease. Then I reminded myself that strangers were allowed to have uncomplicated afternoons. When I returned, I sent Priya one short email. Please confirm that no payment method, approval, or contact information in my name will be used without my written authorization. I read it before sending. It was factual. It did not accuse her. It made the boundary legible. Her response came before the end of the day. She wrote, "Confirmed. I have placed a hold on the file pending current authorization." I put my phone down and cried for 2 minutes. The hold did not solve my marriage or my family. It stopped the next thing from happening without me. My mother arrived at my apartment the following evening with a container of soup and the face she wore when she wanted to avoid an argument. I almost did not let her in. Then I saw that she had brought the blue container from my childhood, the one she used when someone was sick. She set it on the counter and said, "I am not here to pressure you." The sentence was careful enough that I knew pressure had already been discussed elsewhere. I offered her tea. We stood in the kitchen because neither of us wanted to choose the intimacy of sitting down. She asked if the venue had canceled the wedding. I said no. I said the venue had asked Mara and Daniel to authorize a new payment arrangement. My mother looked relieved, then guilty for looking relieved. "So it can still happen," she said. "That was never mine to decide," I told her. "I only decided what could happen through my name." She nodded, but I could see her struggling with the difference. To her, a boundary still looked like a threat because someone else had to react to it. She told me Mara had not slept. I said I had not slept either. My mother began to say that Mara regretted everything. I asked whether Mara regretted using my account or regretted being unable to use it now. My mother looked down at the soup container. It was not a question she could answer. I did not press her. I had no interest in making my mother deliver a confession she had not heard. But I wanted her to notice that regret has details. Without details, it can become another word for wanting the discomfort to end. Later, she said, "You were always the stronger one." I felt the old pull in that sentence, the invitation to be strong enough for everyone. I said, "I do not want to be the stronger one. I want to be treated fairly." Her eyes filled, and this time I did not apologize for making them fill. Before she left, she asked whether I would come to dinner the next week. Mara would not be there, she promised. I said I would think about it. That was the most honest answer I had. A few hours at my mother's table still felt like entering a room where everyone knew a different version of the rules. After she went home, I ate some of the soup. It was too salty. I laughed at that because my mother had always added too much salt when she was worried. The taste made me sad, but it also made me remember that people can care for you and still ask you to carry things they should carry themselves. The seating chart had notes in the margin. Keep Aunt Rosalie away from Elise's side. Do not seat Daniel's office team near family. Ask Elise about the final dessert count. I stopped reading after that line. The page treated me as a logistical risk and a useful resource at the same time. I printed only the section with my contact information. Then I folded it into thirds and placed it in the folder. I did not need the entire guest list to establish what had happened. I needed enough to show why I was asking to be removed. Priya called instead of replying by email. Her voice was low, professional, and tired. She said she had spoken to her supervisor and wanted to be certain I understood the venue's process. The existing credit could be applied only if the original account holder authorized it. The couple could book a different arrangement, but the old account could not remain open under my name. "Thank you for explaining," I said. Please send that in writing. I did not say it because I distrusted her. I said it because I had learned that a calm email prevents later memories from becoming arguments. Daniel's message arrived 5 minutes later. You are making this public. I sat at my desk and let the anger rise, then settle. Nothing I had done was public. I had contacted the business that held my information. What he meant was that consequences had reached a place he could not control. I typed. The venue contacted me because my information was on the account. I asked them to remove it. I removed the second sentence I had written, which was much sharper. Then I sent the first one and returned to work. That night, I removed myself from an old family group chat. I did not announce it. I pressed leave, confirmed the prompt, and watched the names disappear. It felt less like cutting people off and more like closing a door in a noisy hallway. Daniel's soft knock came at 6:40, just as I was taking vegetables from the oven. The smell of rosemary filled the hallway when I opened the door. For one strange second, I thought of the dinners we used to make together, when he would insist he could tell if potatoes were done by tapping them with a fork. He said he had tried to email, but I had not answered quickly enough. I told him I answered financial emails within a day. This is not just financial, he said. I asked what it was then. He looked away. He spoke about how lonely he had felt at the end of our marriage. He said Mara had understood him. He said neither of them had planned for things to happen this way. I listened because I wanted to know whether he could say the truth without decorating it. He could not. He described choices as weather. Things happened. Feelings changed. Plans got complicated. At no point did he say, I lied to you. At no point did he say, I used your name without permission. I told him I understood that people can be unhappy. I understood that marriages can end. But unhappiness did not give you access to my accounts, I said. He flinched as if I had made the conversation cruel. He asked whether I wanted him to cancel the wedding. The question was designed to make me responsible for the outcome. I said, I am not asking you to cancel anything. I am asking you not to use me to fund it. He had no answer to that. For a moment he looked like the person I had loved. That was the hardest part. His face was familiar enough to make my body want to comfort him. I had to hold the chain on the door with both hands. I am sorry you are hurting, I said. But I am not the person who can make this easier for you. It was the closest I came to a speech. He looked at me as though he had expected a different Elise to appear if he waited long enough. After he left, I threw away the vegetables because they had gone cold and gray. Then I made toast. I sat at the table and wrote down the conversation while the toast cooled beside me. I noted his offer to discuss repayment. I noted that I had asked for it in writing. The next morning I found a draft email from him in my inbox. The subject line was resolution. He had not sent it. I did not open it. I did not need every unfinished thought he had. I needed the ones he chose to stand behind. Lena met me at a cafe near the library. She chose a table by the window and arrived early, which was typical of her. Before I could say anything, she pushed a small envelope across the table. Inside was a list of 3 solicitors and a note that said, only if you want advice. No pressure. I thanked her and put the envelope in my bag. I did not call anyone that day. I wanted information, but I did not want to turn every step into a battle. Still, it mattered that someone had offered me a resource without insisting I use it. Lena said she had heard Mara tell people the venue had made an administrative mistake. Do you want me to say something? She asked. I said no. I did not want Lena to become another person carrying my documents into rooms I was trying to leave. Instead, I asked her to promise that if anyone used my name in a financial conversation, she would tell me directly. She agreed. That agreement was simple and useful. It did not require her to hate Mara or choose a side in public. When the private room announcement went out, I felt a strange mixture of relief and shame. Relief because the pressure on the account had ended. Shame because part of me still worried that I had diminished the day. I wrote that thought in my journal and read it back. Their smaller wedding was not something I had done to them. It was the size they could afford without using a credit that belonged to me. Seeing the sentence on paper helped. The truth often looked less dramatic than the stories built around it. During my walks, I began leaving my phone at home. At first, I worried something urgent would happen. Then I noticed how often the urgency existed only in my imagination. Without the phone, I could hear traffic whine through the bare branches and my own steps against the pavement. One Sunday I went to a museum alone. I spent nearly an hour in front of a painting I had seen before and never noticed. It showed a woman reading by a window. Nothing was happening. The quiet concentration of it made me ache. I bought a postcard of the painting from the gift shop. At home I taped it above my desk. It reminded me that a life does not need a crisis to be meaningful. A person can simply sit by a window and belong to her own attention. The week before the wedding, Mara's colleague sent me a message by mistake. It said, "I hope Elise does not do anything." There was no greeting. I read it once then deleted it. I refused to spend the week proving I was not the threat in a story built around my silence. On Friday evening I put fresh batteries in the radio, though I rarely listened to it. I wanted small plans for the next day. I wrote a list: market, flowers, laundry, lunch, walk, dinner. The list did not cure anticipation. Gave it somewhere to go. At the market, the florist asked whether the flowers were for a celebration. I said, "For my apartment." She smiled and said that was reason enough. The ease of her answer followed me home. At 3, I took a bath and left the bathroom door unlocked. That detail sounds silly, but for months I had moved through my own home, as if someone might need something from me. Leaving the door unlocked was a small reminder that I was alone by choice, not waiting for anyone. When I turned the phone back on, a photo from the wedding appeared in a family thread before I had muted it completely. Mara was smiling. Daniel's hand was at her waist. I felt my stomach drop. Then I closed the image without examining it. I did not need to deny that the photo hurt. I needed to deny it the power to direct the rest of my night. "I made tea," answered Lena, and put the phone face down in another room. Near midnight, my mother left a voicemail. She said she hoped I had been okay today. Her voice sounded older than usual. I did not call back. The next morning I sent, "I am okay. I need the weekend quiet." She replied with a heart. It was imperfect, but it was not an argument. The first rumor came from a cousin I barely knew. She wrote that she had heard I had threatened the venue. I asked who told her that. She did not answer. I decided not to chase the source. Rumors survive by making everyone feel like an investigator. I wrote a single factual statement for myself. I did not authorize use of my account. I asked the venue to remove my information. I did not request cancellation of the wedding. I kept it in my notes. When someone asked a direct question, I used those sentences and stopped. My aunt called after our conversation and said she had been thinking about the time I paid Mara's university deposit when our parents were short. I had forgotten it. She had not. "We got used to you catching things before they fell," she said. Her honesty made me sad because it was true. My competence had become a family cushion. People praised it while leaning on it. No one noticed the weight until I moved. I told her I did not want anyone to attack Mara on my behalf. She said she understood. Then she asked what support would look like. I thought for a moment and said, "Believe me when I say no. Do not carry messages. Do not tell me what they are saying unless it affects something practical." She wrote it down. I heard the pen scratching on paper. That small sound felt more respectful than any dramatic declaration could have. At work, Farah invited me to join a weekend book club. I nearly refused because social plans felt irresponsible while my family story was unsettled. Then I said yes. The book was difficult and nobody agreed about the ending. I spoke twice. Both times, people listened without trying to fix what I said. I began to see recovery as a collection of ordinary permissions. Permission to be interested in something else. Permission to decline an invitation. Permission to answer a question with, "I do not want to discuss that." These were small rights, but I had not been using them. The first transfer arrived on a Tuesday morning, while I was brushing my teeth. My phone lit up on the bathroom counter. For a second, I thought it was a marketing alert. Then I saw Daniel's name and sat on the edge of the tub. The amount matched the schedule. I opened the spreadsheet, marked the first line paid, and saved the file. There was no rush of victory. I felt a tightness release from a place beneath my ribs. The second payment was late by 2 days. My old self wanted to send a message immediately. Instead, I reread the agreement. It allowed a brief delay only with notice, and no notice had come. I waited until the third day, then sent one email asking for confirmation of the transfer date. Daniel replied within an hour. He said there had been a bank issue and attached a receipt. I did not ask for more. The payment arrived the next morning. I updated the spreadsheet and closed it. That sequence taught me something important. Boundaries did not require me to become hard or suspicious. They required me to follow the terms I had stated. I did not need to punish a 2-day delay. I needed to notice it and respond proportionately. When Mara wrote near my birthday, I read her message in a parked car after work. The rain tapped the windshield. I could hear people leaving a nearby restaurant, laughing as they hurried toward their rides. Her apology did not contain every answer I wanted, but it named one thing clearly. She had assumed I would absorb the cost because I had always helped her before. Seeing that sentence made my hands shake. It was not enough. It was also more honest than anything she had said before. I waited 24 hours before replying. I did not want my response to be shaped by the first surge of feeling. When I finally wrote, I thanked her for taking responsibility for that assumption. I said distance remained necessary. I did not promise a future relationship I could not yet imagine. Months later, my manager offered me a new role. The work involved coordinating a small team, setting budgets, and saying no to requests that did not fit the plan. I almost laughed when I read the job description. My life had given me a brutal rehearsal for clarity. I accepted the role because I wanted it, not because I needed to prove I was capable. That distinction changed how I approached the work. I delegated. I asked questions. I did not take responsibility for outcomes that belonged to someone else. The first time Mara and I spoke after the apology, it lasted 6 minutes. She called to ask whether our mother had mentioned a medical appointment. I answered the practical question. When Mara tried to say more, I told her I could not have a larger conversation that day. She said, "Okay." There was no argument. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. Respecting a boundary once does not erase the past, but it can become a small piece of new information. I began therapy that winter. I chose a counselor who did not ask me to forgive anyone in the first session. She asked what I wanted my days to feel like. I said, less defended, saying it made me realize how tired I was. We talked about the difference between vigilance and awareness. I did not need to inspect every kindness for a hidden cost. I needed to notice whether a relationship allowed mutuality. Could I ask for help? Could I say no? Could the other person tolerate disappointment without turning it into an accusation? Those questions changed my friendships. I stopped answering every message immediately. I stopped volunteering before anyone asked. When people thanked me for being easy, I wondered whether they meant kind or convenient. Lena and I took a weekend trip to a small coastal town in spring. We ate sandwiches on a bench facing the water and complained about the wind. At one point, she asked whether I ever missed Mara. "I miss who I thought she was with me," I said. The answer surprised me because it was precise. I did not miss the current relationship. I missed the shared language, the old jokes, the certainty that she would protect rather than expose me. Lena did not tell me the feeling would pass. She said, "That makes sense." I had come to value that sentence. It allowed pain to exist without turning it into a project for someone else to solve. Before the trip, I reviewed my budget slowly. Train tickets, hotel, meals, museum pass, a small amount for books or gifts. At the bottom, I added a line called "room to change my mind." I smiled when I typed it. For years, I had treated money as a way to prevent discomfort. I paid early. I covered gaps. I made every plan sturdier than it needed to be because I was afraid someone would be disappointed. This budget was different. It was a record of choices made for my own life. At the station, I bought coffee and a pastry I did not need. I ate both while watching the departure board change. No one was waiting for me to solve anything. No invoice was in my bag. The quiet felt unfamiliar, then generous. On the train, I opened the old folder one final time, only long enough to confirm that the archive was complete. Then I placed the external drive in a labeled box at home and removed the folder from my desktop. I kept the documents because keeping them was sensible. I stopped keeping them in view because I no longer needed them to remind me of the truth. The final lesson was not that evidence makes grief easy. It does not. Evidence gave me footing when people tried to turn a clear fact into a moral debate. It helped me separate what I could control from what I could not. I could not control whether Mara understood the depth of the loss. I could not control whether Daniel became honest. I could not control what relatives chose to believe. I could control the account in my name, the messages I answered, and the future expenses I agreed to. That was enough control to begin again.